At 7:15 a.m., the small apartment on the south side of Chicago stirred to life. Ethan Miller moved through the cramped kitchen with the quiet precision of a man who had learned to make every second count. At 36, once a rising aerospace engineer, he now worked long shifts as a mechanic to keep the bills paid. His 8-year-old daughter Emily sat at the table, her small hand wrapped around a colored pencil as she sketched in her notebook. Every few minutes she touched the inhaler beside her, a reminder of the asthma that shadowed her play. Ethan glanced at it too, the way a soldier checks his weapon before battle. He remembered another morning, another breath that never returned. His wife, Anna, trapped in the thick smoke of a warehouse fire, had been gone 3 years now. The photograph on the shelf showed her smiling, holding Emily in a red sweater. Ethan's eyes always lingered there, a mix of grief and resolve etched into his face. That fire had taken her, but it had also lit the purpose that drove him now. On his workbench in the corner sat the rescue mask, a compact device designed to buy precious minutes of air in smoke-filled rooms. It was crude, handmade, but it carried every ounce of his determination to prevent another family from standing helpless as he once did. Across the city, at precisely 8 o'clock, the glass tower of Hale Technologies gleamed in the morning light. Inside, Victoria Hale commanded her office like a general surveying a battlefield. At 34, she had built a reputation as a ruthless visionary, a CEO who measured every decision in profit margins and return on investment. 3 screens glowed on her desk, charts and projections scrolling in endless motion. Every call filtered through her assistant, every minute booked for maximum gain. Efficiency was her creed, sentiment her enemy. Just outside her office, her 10-year-old daughter Sophia sat quietly with a book on butterflies. The girl's inhaler rested on the arm of the chair, a silent echo of Emily's morning routine. Sophia had her mother's sharp mind, but none of her hardness. She longed for stories and warmth, yet her world was ruled by schedules and expectations. Victoria offered love in scheduled intervals, measured in appointments rather than embraces. The contrast was stark. Ethan's world ran on love, loss, and the stubborn hope that one invention could make a difference. Victoria's ran on numbers, power, and the cold logic of efficiency. 2 lives set on parallel tracks, moving in opposite directions, yet destined to collide. In Ethan's apartment, Emily taped her heart-shaped logo to the rescue mask with a proud smile. In Victoria's office, Sophia pressed her inhaler nervously as her mother dismissed another call. The threads of their stories were already woven, waiting for the fire that would pull them tight. The convention center buzzed with the restless energy of ambition. Bright screens flashed slogans, models in sharp suits handed out glossy brochures, and speakers boomed over microphones as entrepreneurs pitched dreams wrapped in neon lights. In the farthest corner, beneath a flickering bulb, Ethan Miller adjusted the edge of his folding table. His booth looked almost invisible among the giants. A stack of budget flyers leaned against a coffee cup. At the center sat the rescue mask, its plain casing softened by the small heart logo his daughter Emily had drawn with markers. She stood beside him in her best dress, clutching flyers in her small hands, smiling with the kind of faith only a child could carry. Ethan's palms were damp as he rehearsed under his breath. He told himself that today was the day someone would listen. He approached each passerby with a steady voice, explaining how smoke kills more people than fire and how his device could buy the precious minutes needed for survival. Most nodded politely and moved on, their eyes already searching for brighter lights and louder claims. Some barely glanced his way, too eager to chase the next big pitch. Each rejection pressed heavier on his shoulders, but he straightened, determined not to let Emily see his discouragement. Then the flow of the crowd shifted. A hush moved down the aisle like a ripple before a wave. Victoria Hale entered with her entourage, her sharp heels tapping against the polished floor. Cameras trailing behind. Assistants flanked her, whispering about profit margins and scalability. Her presence pulled attention like gravity. Vendors leaned forward, hopeful that a glance from her might validate their work. Ethan's heart thudded in his chest. He knew this was the chance. He stepped forward, voice unsteady but loud enough to be heard. He showed how the rescue mask sealed against the face, how its filter trapped toxic particles, how the oxygen cartridge gave air when lungs were burning. His hands trembled as he held the device in the smoke chamber, watching the meter stay steady in the safe zone. Emily looked up at him, her wide eyes urging him on. Victoria paused, her expression unreadable. She lifted the mask, turned it once in her manicured hand, then set it down with deliberate slowness. Her lips curved into a thin smile. "Cute toy," she said, loud enough for the cameras. "Maybe try the craft fair next time." Laughter erupted around them, sharp and cruel. Vendors who had once nodded politely now smirked. Investors who had lingered melted into the crowd. The spotlight that might have been salvation turned into a stage for humiliation. Ethan felt the air leave his chest warm. Years of work, endless nights, and the memory of Anna's last breath all reduced to a punchline. His jaw clenched as he gathered the flyers no one wanted, his hands shaking more now than when he had presented. Emily tugged at his sleeve. Her voice was soft, steady, carrying more certainty than any pitch. One day they'll need it. Her words were meant for him, but they carried into the empty space like a prophecy waiting to be fulfilled. It was close to 11:30 p.m. when Ethan Miller sat alone at the kitchen table. The room lit only by a single lamp and the glow from the city outside the window. Bills lay scattered across the surface, their red stamps shouting overdue. Beside them were notebooks filled with hand-drawn diagrams and calculations for the rescue mask. He rubbed his tired eyes and pressed his palms into the table, the weight of failure heavy on his shoulders. The memory of the expo replayed in his mind. Victoria Hale's mocking voice, echoing like smoke that refused to clear. But another memory pushed deeper, darker. The warehouse fire 3 years earlier. The call that came too late. The traffic that blocked the fire trucks. Anna's voice breaking as she said the smoke was getting worse. He had run inside, lungs burning, and carried her down 3 flights of stairs. By the time they reached the street, her body was limp, her breath already stolen. He could still feel the crushing silence when the paramedics shook their heads. That guilt never left him. Every sketch, every prototype was an attempt to rewrite that night, even though he knew he never could. A small hand reached across the table. Emily stood there in her pajamas, holding up a piece of paper with bright swirls of color. She had drawn a heart logo for the mask, bold and imperfect, filled with the innocence he had lost. She taped it to the side of a prototype and smiled proudly. "Now it's made with love," she said, her voice light but steady. Ethan's throat tightened. For a moment the weight lifted. He pulled her close, resting his hand on her hair, silently promising her that one day this device would matter. In that quiet moment, grief and love merged into resolve. The sirens wailed in the distance as Ethan Miller pushed through the smoke-filled lobby of Hale Tower. His lungs burned with every step, but the rescue mask on his face delivered steady air, the beeping of its carbon sensor warning of rising danger. He clutched his bag of prototypes tight against his chest and forced himself up the stairwell. Each floor grew hotter, darker. The concrete walls streaked with soot. His boots slipped on wet steps where sprinklers had failed to reach. He counted each landing, steadying his breath the way he had trained himself during long nights of testing. By the time he reached the 30th floor, the stairwell felt like a chimney. Through the thick haze, he heard pounding metal and muffled cries. The elevator had stalled between floors. He forced open the shaft door, the heat rushing out like a furnace. Inside, 4 figures pressed against the walls, their faces pale and streaked with sweat. A child's voice gasped, barely audible. Sophia Hale, clutching her chest, her small inhaler useless in the toxic air. Ethan worked fast. He pulled out a rescue mask, the one with the colorful heart logo taped on by Emily, and pressed it over Sophia's face. The seal clicked into place. He adjusted the airflow, his fingers moving with the precision of a father who had done this 100 times for his own daughter. Her breath steadied, her eyes focusing again as cool oxygen flowed. He whispered for her to keep counting with the beeps. She nodded weakly, her lips regaining color. One by one, he handed out the remaining masks. An elderly man who had collapsed in the corner, a young executive shaking with panic, a pregnant woman struggling to stay conscious. Each mask fitted, each breath stabilized, the small devices buying the minutes that could mean life. The heat groaned through the shaft walls. The cables above creaked like they might snap. He braced the doors open with his crowbar, then pulled each person through, lifting Sophia first with her tiny hands gripping his shirt. She weighed almost nothing, yet he carried her with the strength of every memory of Anna and every promise to Emily. They moved as a group down the stairwell, Ethan leading, shouting clear instructions between coughs. When the smoke grew too dense, he swapped oxygen cartridges with the quick flick of a release, showing Sophia how to keep pace with the beeps. She stayed close, trusting him completely. By the time they reached the lower floors, the glow of flashlights cut through the darkness. Firefighters surged upward, shocked to see survivors walking out under their own power. One glanced at the rescue mask readings and muttered in disbelief that these people should have been unconscious long ago. Outside the tower, chaos reigned. Crowds pressed against barricades. Reporters shouted. Flames licked the night sky. And there, barefoot on the pavement, Victoria Hale stumbled forward, her designer heels long abandoned. Her face was streaked with tears, her body trembling as she pushed past security. She froze when she saw Sophia in Ethan's arms, breathing steadily through the mask she had once dismissed as a toy. The colorful heart logo glowed faintly in the lights of emergency vehicles, the childish mark of love now a symbol of survival. Victoria's legs gave out, and she fell to her knees, the ice around her breaking in a rush of relief and shame. The crowd gasped, cameras flashing, as she clutched her daughter to her chest. The two worlds collided in that moment. Ethan, the man mocked into silence, stood as the reason Sophia lived. Victoria, the woman who once measured every minute in profit, saw for the first time that value was measured in breaths, not numbers. The flames were finally under control when the reporters swarmed in, their cameras flashing and microphones thrust forward. Survivors were being led away on stretchers. Firefighters shouted orders, and the crowd pressed closer for a glimpse of the man who had walked into the tower when others had fled. Ethan Miller stood near the barricade, his shoulder torn and his clothes streaked with soot, clutching Emily's hand while paramedics checked his cuts. Through the chaos, Victoria Hale pushed her way forward, Sophia clinging to her side. The powerful CEO who once commanded boardrooms now looked fragile, her eyes swollen from tears, her bare feet scraped from the pavement. For a long moment, she simply stood in front of Ethan, the cameras catching every detail of her hesitation. Then, with a voice that trembled but carried, she admitted that she had been wrong. She said she had been arrogant, blind to what truly mattered, and that her dismissal of his invention had almost cost her everything. The crowd hushed, the weight of her words sinking in. Ethan looked at her calmly, his face lined with exhaustion but steady. He told her he never built the rescue mask for recognition or profit. He built it for the few minutes that separate panic from survival, for the breaths that keep a child alive until help arrives. His words were simple, but they carried the truth of every sleepless night and every memory of Anna's last breath. Beside them, Sophia reached for Emily's hand. The two girls stood together, their small fingers intertwined. The mask, with its colorful heart logo dangling from Sophia's wrist. They whispered about the drawing, about how Emily's heart had turned into a symbol of hope. The innocence of their voices softened the air, dissolving the tension that had hung like smoke. Victoria watched them, her cold exterior cracking as she saw her daughter alive because of something made not from profit, but from love. For the first time she looked at Ethan not as a failed dreamer, but as a man whose values shone against her own emptiness. Relief, admiration, and quiet hope washed over the scene, marking the beginning of a bond forged in fire and sealed by the hands of two children. By the next morning, the story was everywhere. Headlines splashed across newspapers and screens called Ethan Miller the mechanic who saved Hale Tower. The same man dismissed at the Chicago Innovation Expo as a dreamer with a toy was now being hailed as a hero whose invention had saved lives. Reporters crowded his small apartment. Investors who once walked past his booth now called non-stop offering money, patents, and deals. But Ethan stood firm, the soot still clinging to his jacket, his eyes steady with resolve. At noon, a press conference gathered outside the burned shell of the tower. Microphones crowded his face, cameras rolling as the world waited for him to claim victory. Instead, he lifted one of the rescue masks, Emily's colorful heart logo still taped to the side, and spoke with quiet force. He said he did not build this to be a product that lined pockets. He built it for the 3 minutes between danger and death, for the breaths that might save a child, a mother, or a janitor caught on the wrong floor. He laid out 3 conditions if the world wanted this device. First, it must remain affordable so no one profits from desperation. Second, the safety standards must be open source so others can improve the design and make it better. Third, every child's unit must be fully subsidized so no family ever has to choose between money and their child's survival. The square went silent. Even the clicking of cameras paused. The words hung in the smoke-scented air, carrying more weight than any investor pitch ever could. For a long moment, no one moved. Then the applause started, first from survivors who had worn the masks that night, then from firefighters who had seen firsthand what they could do, and finally, from the crowd that had gathered to watch justice unfold. Victoria Hale stepped forward, no longer in heels and no longer with the armor of a CEO. Her voice shook, not from weakness, but from the force of humility. She said she had measured everything by efficiency and profit, but the fire had stripped that illusion bare. She pledged to honor his conditions in full, using her company's resources to bring the rescue mask to every school, every housing project, every place where people lived with risk and without power. She said human life would come before efficiency from this day on. The crowd erupted, not with the empty cheer of spectacle, but with the deep satisfaction of seeing arrogance humbled and integrity lifted. Ethan did not raise his arms or bask in the moment. He simply stood, holding Emily's hand, the small heart logo between them, proof that love and conviction had triumphed over greed. For once, the world recognized not just the invention, but the man who refused to compromise its purpose. Justice had been done, and everyone felt it. 6 months later, the city looked different. In every school hallway, next to fire extinguishers and bright red alarms, hung rows of rescue masks. Teachers taught children to use them as naturally as they taught stop, drop, and roll. During safety drills, voices of children echoed down corridors as they counted their breaths with the steady beeps. What once was mocked as a toy had become part of everyday life, a quiet shield against the unthinkable. Emily and Sophia had become inseparable. At recess, they could be found sitting cross-legged under the shade of a tree, teaching classmates how to put the masks on and making it feel like a game rather than a lesson in fear. Their friendship bridged two worlds, one born from struggle and the other from privilege, now united in something larger than both. Children followed their lead, learning that being prepared was not about being scared, but about having power in their hands. Victoria Hale had changed too. Hale Technologies no longer bragged about efficiency above all else. Its new mission was human-centered safety, using its wealth and influence to make buildings safer and families stronger. Reporters who once called her ruthless now wrote about her transformation, though she always credited Ethan. Behind closed doors, she remained a mother first, grateful for every breath her daughter now took. In his small workshop, Ethan Miller kept building. His workbench was neater now, stocked with tools he once could not afford, but his focus had not shifted. New sketches covered the walls, ideas for devices to protect against floods, quakes, and the quiet dangers people overlooked. Emily sat nearby, sometimes drawing, sometimes helping, always carrying the original heart logo in her notebook. To Ethan, it was a reminder that his greatest invention was not a device, but the lesson that love could be engineered into hope. At 9 years old, Emily stood before a gym full of parents and teachers at her school's safety night. She wore a simple dress and held a rescue mask in both hands. She spoke without notes, her voice clear and steady. She said her dad made the mask because her mom had died. But he kept making it so other families could live. The room fell silent, the weight of her words settling like sunlight. Parents nodded, some wiping their eyes. Teachers reached for their children's shoulders. Ethan watched from the back, pride swelling with grief and gratitude woven together. His wife's loss had become a gift to others. His daughter's drawing had become a symbol of survival, and his quiet persistence had become a force for change. The story no longer belonged only to him. It belonged to every family who now had a little more time, a little more hope, because someone had refused to let tragedy be the final word.